In the summer of 2019, BlackRock predicted the financial and monetary responses to the pandemic before the pandemic even happened. Yep, it's safe to say that when the world's largest asset manager speaks, we should listen. Earlier this year, BlackRock's CEO Larry Fink published his annual letter to investors. If you read between the lines, you start to get a sense of what could be coming next, or rather, what BlackRock is planning.
But what disturbed me as I wrote this letter, we never talk about retirement. It is not a conversation we're having.
So today, we're going to summarize this letter and tell you what it means for you and for the markets. So, let's find out what Larry is thinking about, shall we?
But if that's all you have when you retire, you're going to be living in poverty.
I'll start by saying that Larry Fink's annual letter to investors is different from his annual letter to CEOs. For context, BlackRock is one of the largest shareholders in the world's largest companies. Larry's letter to CEOs basically tells corporations what to do. Oddly enough, this year's edition has yet to be published. Similarly, Larry's annual letter to investors basically tells the individuals and institutions investing with BlackRock what the asset manager's focuses are. And this is the letter we'll be summarizing today, and you can rest assured we will also summarize Larry's letter to CEOs when it's published, if at all. That said, the first part of Larry's letter is eye-opening, as it's titled, quote, "Time to Rethink Retirement." For reference, many countries around the world have been raising retirement ages because governments don't have enough money to pay pensions. This is a consequence of there not being enough taxpayers. More about the population implosion in the description. Moving on. Now, Larry starts by talking about how his parents didn't retire with very much money, and how this inspired him to create BlackRock and make it possible for people to retire comfortably. Naturally, Larry argues this can only be done through investing in capital markets, and says that his letter will explain why. For those unfamiliar, capital markets essentially include every financial instrument you can think of, particularly stocks, bonds, and private investing. Obviously, asset managers like BlackRock have become increasingly involved in all of these, including buying up single-family homes, which they then rent to the likes of us. And people wonder why housing is unaffordable. Anyways, in the second part of his letter, Larry gives a brief history of capital markets in the United States. He explains that there are two ways to make money: by saving money in a bank or through investing. Larry argues that the large capital markets of the US are why it's performed so well since the 2008 recession. On that topic, Larry notes that he was one of the people who played a role in creating mortgage-backed securities. You know, the financial instruments that caused the 2008 financial crisis. In retrospect, that's not all that surprising. Larry holds a bachelor's degree in political science and an MBA. Not exactly a markets guy. Anyhow, Larry notes that the key takeaway is that a strong banking system is insufficient for a country to have growth. It must also have strong capital markets. He notes that this is something that governments around the world are starting to notice, and Larry reveals that he's been speaking with them. Yikes. He specifies that he went to 17 countries last year, where he not only spoke with policymakers, but also heads of state, i.e. presidents and prime ministers. He claims that they are itching to grow their capital markets, and of course, BlackRock is there to offer a helping hand, surely with no strings attached. Now, what's scary is that Larry reveals that Indian officials aren't happy about the fact that the average Indian uses gold to store their personal wealth. They want that money to be in banks, and Larry presumably wants it at BlackRock. Regardless, it suggests that governments are threatened by gold. Believe it or not, but Larry seems to agree with them, as he notes that gold has underperformed the Indian stock market, and that investing in gold doesn't help the Indian economy. So, don't be surprised to see gold restrictions in the countries that Larry is advising, with economic weakness as justification. Larry then goes on to reveal BlackRock's endgame. He argues that investing in capital markets is not only ideal, but necessary, and that's for two reasons. The first is because it's the only way to fund retirements. The second is because it's the only way to build out ESG-compliant infrastructure. That is the endgame. ESG, for those unfamiliar, is an ideology being pushed by asset managers like BlackRock and megabanks like Bank of America. The purpose of ESG is to achieve the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, which require countries to introduce dystopian technologies like CBDCs, digital IDs, and smart cities by 2030, hence why you see that date 2030 everywhere. You can learn more about the UN's SDGs and ESG using the link in the description. And by the way, if you're enjoying the video so far, be sure to monster that like button to help others find it, and subscribe to the channel and ping that notification bell so you don't miss the next one. Alas, poor Yorick. I knew him, Horatio, a fellow of infinite jest, of most excellent fancy. He hath borne me on his back 1,000 times. And yet, for all his vitality, he kneweth not of the Coin Bureau deals page. Where are your 60% discount on trading fees now? Your exchange sign-up bonuses of up to $60,000. Wherefore art thy discounts on hardware wallets too? If thou hadst only beheld the link in the description below, how thou wouldst have marvelled at these riches. Alas, poor Yorick. I knew him, Horatio. Now, in the third part of his letter, Larry asks how people can afford to retire given how much longer they're living. By now, you'll know the answer is to give all your money to BlackRock. Case in point, Larry notes a joint venture BlackRock has with an Indian retirement firm that invests in digital infrastructure. In other words, you will own nothing and be happy, and your retirement savings and investments will be used by BlackRock to make it happen. Speaking of which, it appears that BlackRock is making big bets on India, presumably because its population will be one of the last to peak sometime in 2050. Take note. Funnily enough, Larry then suddenly pivots to talking about the US, presumably because the reader may start wondering just how involved BlackRock is getting in India. Ironically, Larry admits that the financial struggles of younger generations are because of policies introduced by boomers like himself. As you might have guessed, BlackRock once again has the solution to save the next generation. After underscoring the fact that America's social security system will run out of funding by 2034 and advocating for later retirements, Larry says that there are 3 ways to fix our future finances. The first is to effectively force workers to use a portion of their paychecks to invest in capital markets via asset managers like BlackRock. Fancy that. Larry reveals that a similar law will go into effect next year in the US, requiring all employers with 401k plans to automatically enroll new employees, a slippery slope. This relates to the second way that BlackRock plans to fix our future finances, and that's to control how we spend our retirement savings. Put simply, BlackRock wants you to not only give them money, but also wants the power to tell you how you can spend this money during your retirement. The good news is that, so far, this is just a product being offered by BlackRock. There don't seem to be any bills or laws requiring this or foreshadowing such a mandate. The bad news is that a similar law could eventually be introduced. After all, if all the boomers retiring cash out too much, well, capital markets go bye-bye. I'll note that this is a very real risk that's been raised by many macro analysts, notably Mike Green. Now, if that wasn't scary enough, Larry refers to this as a, quote, revolution in retirement. It goes without saying that this revolution is more like the Russian kind than the French kind. To add insult to injury, Larry believes that BlackRock's plan will create hope instead of fear. Are you feeling hopeful yet? But wait, there's more. Earlier in his letter, Larry implied that the third way to fix our financial future is to fix the demographic problem. That is, have more kids, or at least increase immigration. But no, all Larry actually said was what I just mentioned a few moments ago. Raise the retirement age, and hey, that'll do it. This might have something to do with the fact that Larry believes machines can replace humans. This is literally what he said during a recent discussion panel hosted by none other than the World Economic Forum. We'll leave a link to his rant in the description if you want to verify it for yourself. Quote, countries will rapidly develop robotics and AI and technology, and the social problems that one will have in substituting machines for humans are going to be far easier in those countries that have declining populations. It's almost as if declining populations are exactly what BlackRock wants. This wouldn't be surprising because shrinking populations are ESG friendly. Fewer people means less emissions. Are you upset about this? Well, if you are, then Larry doesn't seem to understand why. Per his letter, quote, there's so much anger and division, and I often struggle to wrap my head around it. My brother in Bitcoin, look in the mirror. Anywho, in the fourth part of his letter, Larry expands on the ESG-compliant infrastructure BlackRock wants to build with your retirement money. He begins with a proclamation. The future of infrastructure is public-private partnership, or rather, BlackRock working with your government. Larry argues that this public-private partnership is the only way to fund infrastructure spending because governments just have too much debt to do it alone. He highlights the fact that the US government's debt burden is growing fast and that fewer and fewer governments are buying US government debt. I'll quickly note that a shortage of funding was exactly why the precursors to the SDGs, the Millennium Development Goals, or MDGs, ultimately failed. Now, Larry then goes one step further by saying, quote, more leaders should pay attention to America's snowballing debt. There's a bad scenario where the American economy starts to look like Japan's in the late 1990s and early 2000s, when debt exceeded GDP and led to periods of austerity and stagnation. Now, Larry insists that this is not inevitable, as there is a third way to reduce debt besides cutting taxes and cutting spending: inflation. Growth. Larry claims that if the US economy grows a lot, then it will be possible to repay the debt. He fails to note that this growth will simultaneously cause inflation. How will the US achieve this growth, you may ask? Well, by investing in energy, says Larry, specifically the unreliable kind because it is the most ESG friendly. If you watched our recent video about why everything is so expensive, you'll know that underinvestment in reliable energy because of ESG is one of the reasons. You'll also know that asset managers like BlackRock are the main ones to blame for this underinvestment. Larry's response to this is that he's recently conceded that oil and gas are going to be required for, quote, a number of years. This is an understatement given that oil and gas are used for 50% of global energy production. What's insane is that Larry points to Germany as an example of a country that's doing energy policy right. Now, this is nuts because Germany shut down its last nuclear power plant last year. This came at a time when its economy was imploding due to high energy costs caused by sanctions and renewables. Larry also points to Texas and says that the state is facing, quote, challenges around energy. He seems to imply that this is due to rising demand, not the state's increasing reliance on intermittent and unreliable energy sources. He even reveals that BlackRock is investing to accelerate the latter. Not only that, but Larry then provides a long list of investments that BlackRock is making to ensure that there is a, quote, fair energy transition. That is, that you'll still be able to heat your home in the winter. As for everything else, that's apparently not so important. You will stay in the pod and live in the metaverse. Fortunately, Larry reveals that BlackRock is still investing more in reliable energy sources than unreliable ones. Why? Well, because that's what BlackRock's clients are demanding. Some of you may have heard that many individuals and institutions threatened to divest because of its ESG stance, and indeed some of them did. But that just scratches the surface of BlackRock's hypocrisy. Larry claims that green energy sources make countries less reliant on foreign powers. This could not be further from the truth. China produces 90% of the materials required for these energy sources. That makes every green energy grid reliant on the CCP. Makes you wonder who's really pulling the strings at BlackRock. Now, in the next part of his letter, Larry reveals how BlackRock is transforming itself. For starters, it's working with a global infrastructure firm called Global Infrastructure Partners, or GIP, which Larry seems to have personal connections to. We will definitely do a video about them at some point. Next, Larry plans on visiting more countries and meeting with more of our leaders to convince them that BlackRock's game plan is the way to go. Though he doesn't say it explicitly, he seems to suggest that BlackRock's increase in assets under management came from foreign sources as a result of his lobbying. In case you missed the news, BlackRock oversees over $10 trillion worth of assets and counting. To put things into perspective, this would make BlackRock the third largest country by GDP. It's also enough money to buy almost half of the US stock market, but BlackRock already has enough voting shares to influence it. Larry notes that the company will continue investing in early-stage ventures, and I'll remind you that BlackRock had invested in failed crypto exchange FTX. I'll also remind you that it's a large shareholder in many Bitcoin mining companies, which, together with its ETFs, could influence BTC. More about that in the description. I digress. Now, here is where things get really interesting. Seemingly out of the blue, Larry notes that, quote, "As we look ahead, the re-risking of client portfolios will create tremendous prospects for both our public and private markets franchises." This is interesting because Larry noted in 2023 that investors were de-risking. Logically, this suggests that BlackRock believes that the markets will go up this year, since re-risking likely means moving from bonds into stocks. So far, this prediction has been on point, yet again. I suppose that's to be expected given that BlackRock can advise the companies it's invested in on how to beat estimates. And this ties into what BlackRock plans to do with the companies it can influence via its voting shares. As expected, Larry is rather vague about this, hinting that BlackRock will keep doing what it's doing, pushing ESG. For what it's worth, the asset manager will also give its clients the ability to have more of a say. In the longer term, Larry notes that, quote, "Our strategy remains centered on growing Aladdin, ETFs and private markets, keeping alpha at the heart of BlackRock, leading in sustainable investing, and advising clients on their whole portfolio." For those unfamiliar, Aladdin is BlackRock's proprietary trading system. More about that in the description. But back to BlackRock's plans. On the private market side, Larry reveals that BlackRock will continue to be focused on ESG infrastructure. On the ETF side, they will continue expanding ETF adoption and introducing new ETFs, noting the spot Bitcoin ETFs. This is significant as it foreshadows additional crypto ETFs, like those for Ethereum, for instance. Larry also notes that BlackRock will be increasingly focused on fixed income, aka government bonds, now that interest rates are, quote, "near long-term averages." This is significant as it suggests that BlackRock believes that interest rates will stay where they are, a contrarian take for those expecting rate cuts. After bragging about the fact that BlackRock's stock has gone up by 90x over the last 25 years, the same returns that many meme coins see in a few weeks, Larry notes that BlackRock acquired GIP, the aforementioned ESG infrastructure firm, and that its CEO, Larry's buddy, will join BlackRock's board. Who needs crony capitalism when you've got nepotism disguised as ESG, eh? Anyway, jokes aside, Larry wraps things up by claiming that BlackRock is one small part of a global success story. A success story that Larry believes is lifting the average person, but in fact is only really benefiting the upper class. Regardless, Larry says it's all possible because of the capital markets, and the people who invest in them. He doesn't say that over 93% of all stocks are owned by the top 10% of people. Oops. So this brings me to the big question, and that's what all this means for you and for the markets. Make no mistake, these are two very different things. From our perspective, BlackRock's leadership appears to be completely disconnected from reality. This is truly frightening given how much money it is managing. Seeing Germany as an example for other countries to follow for their energy policies is either extremely ignorant or extremely evil. Most would argue it's the latter. Whatever the case, the result is the same. The rich get richer and the poor get poorer. This is often what happens in a centrally planned economy. And therein lies BlackRock's biggest error. The asset manager believes that the only way to provide solutions to problems and to create prosperity is centralized control to the point that it needs to partner with governments, roll out stuff like CBDCs, and restrict access to gold in the name of economic growth. This doesn't sound like something you would do to solve problems and create prosperity. It sounds like something you would do to prevent a financial Ponzi scheme from falling apart. For all of their faults, governments only have a fraction of the debt that banks and asset managers do. According to a recent report, the world is $315 trillion in debt, but the derivatives debts of banks and asset managers are estimated to be in the quadrillions. These derivatives are backed by other assets whose value must rise. Otherwise, the derivatives debt bubble will burst and, well, game over. When you step back and look at what BlackRock is proposing, it all involves the same thing. Give us your money and let us decide what to do with it, including when we give it back to you. It's very possible that ESG is just an excuse to trick people into thinking they'll save the world by giving BlackRock their cash. This all makes BlackRock's new approach that much more frightening, because it seems that Larry has tricked everyone he can in the US and is now turning his attention overseas. Unfortunately, many countries are desperate for investment. This is evident in the fact that BlackRock's AUM grows as Larry travels. And no, calling it trickery isn't hyperbole when it results in energy infrastructure that isn't going to cut it, but cuts big checks for BlackRock and other VCs that invested in it. Never forget that Sri Lanka had the highest ESG score of any country before it basically collapsed. This, though, hasn't stopped BlackRock from forging ahead. The result is that the average person will continue to be worse off wherever BlackRock makes its mark, unless they copy the asset manager's trades. And this relates to what it means for the markets. In short, it means that bad ideas will keep receiving obscene amounts of funding so long as they are ESG friendly. What's so frustrating is that BlackRock seems to be focusing its ESG investing on startups and private companies. This makes it hard for regular folks like you and me to get a piece of Aladdin's magic money, and that is probably by design. Well, at least you can create an ESG startup if you have zero in the way of morals. In all seriousness, the best way to profit from BlackRock's ESG obsession could actually be through cryptocurrency. This is because that's exactly what we've seen with AI. Most AI companies are private, which has made it hard for us plebs to profit from their growth. This has turned AI cryptos into proxy plays of sorts. As some of you will know, there is a crypto niche called ReFi, which stands for regenerative finance. From what we've seen, many of these crypto projects are questionable, but they nonetheless check the box for ESG. Many of them could go vertical if BlackRock's ESG trend comes back with a vengeance. The caveat is that Larry Fink's politics could soon collide with physics. The fact of the matter is that there is a shortage of primary energy due to underinvestment by BlackRock and others, and these newer energy sources aren't going to cut it, except for nuclear, which also deserves a video of its own. Once this becomes apparent, it's likely that BlackRock will see a lot more divestment if it doesn't change its course. With Larry on the throne, though, this is unlikely, so divestment is perhaps inevitable. Let's just hope that we don't see another asset manager emerge claiming that it's going to save the world with something else. Newsflash, the average person doesn't want to be saved. They just want to be left alone and able to live well. So, Larry, on the off chance you're watching, take note. And that is all for today's video, folks. So if you found it informative, be sure to pound that like button to dust to let us know, and subscribe to the channel and ping that notification bell so you stay informed. If you want to help inform others about what BlackRock is planning, then be sure to share this video with them. As always, thank you for watching, and I will see you next time. Guy, over and out.